Kind of like VCRs. They were $2,000, and now they're about $100.
Yeah, if you can even find a VCR. Yeah, they're so tough to find. DVDs and other things having advanced so much. It's amazing. Yeah, DVDs are really all over. You know, you think about for you, and obviously the embalming process is a critical one, and that has to. Does that have to happen after all deaths, Jim, or is?
No, it's up to the family. The law that was put on the books that required embalming from public transportation purposes was actually put on the books in July of 1862. Wow. And what happened was, we at that time, you know, we lost 664,000 roughly soldiers, and a battle would take place over a period of 2 or 3 days, and the United States, most of the war was fought, of course, on southern soil.
Right.
And if a Union officer lost their life, the federal government would try to send them back for burial in their hometown.
Right.
And that's when we realized, that's when the government realized, because embalming wasn't done that prevalently at that time. And of course, with decomposition and so forth, and everybody, the bodies would go back on trains, and trains were also the only means of transportation for common carriers for average folks, you know.
Right.
So you can imagine the conditions that transpired with the odor and so forth, a lot of complaints. So Congress passed a law stating that in order for a body to be carried by a public carrier, it had to be embalmed. So, and that law is still on the books today.
Is that right?
But if you're and then some states have regulations where if a loved one, the family wants the loved one to be viewed, then if it's to be viewed, you know, after a day or so after death, and for public health protection, embalming is required. But other than that, you know, it's not. You know, a lot of the members of the Jewish faith, they aren't embalmed, because they're usually, you know, that ceremony normally takes place within 24 to 36 hours.
Right, very quickly.
So. But those are the regulations. And a lot of people say, what, embalming is such a negative to a lot of folks only because they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But basically, all embalming is the same thing that takes place with kidney dialysis. Same identical procedure, only in dialysis you just go into the axillary system, the venous and the carotid system, and displace the fluid, the body fluids.
So it's removing the bodily fluids.
And then it's purified through a dialysis machine, and then it's re-entered back into the arterial system and drained out of the venous system. Same identical process takes place. Most embalmers go to the carotid area or internal jugular, which they are parallel venous systems of the body. And or you can go to the femoral, the bigger veins in the legs, femoral artery and vein, do the same thing. But you just inject into one and displace the body fluids, and you replace it with formaldehyde instead of arsenic, which was used at one time. And
is that right?
Arsenic was actually used up until 1912. Then it was outlawed, simply because a lot of people, the bodies that were embalmed with arsenic, buried in cemeteries, the arsenic was contaminating drowned or drinking water in towns.
Yeah.
A lot of embalmers were actually dying from the arsenic being exposed to it. We lost several surgeons during the Civil War that were because of the harsh chemicals that were used, and that was the only thing that was available at the time. You know?
Of course, that process is relatively, I mean, you're not talking about a lot of cutting unless there's organ donation or other donation that goes on. But the embalmers have to be capable of doing both. If someone has lots of bodily parts that are being donated, that embalmer is the one who is oftentimes...
They're challenged with trying to create what's known as a memory picture, you know, putting back the loved one's remains as presentable as,
right, so that families can actually view.
Yeah, what it is, it's kind of a. I've talked to families through the years, and if what happens is the first step to healing after a loved one's died the first step is to actually accept the fact that that loved one has died.
Mm-hmm.
Psychologists say the easiest way to do that is actually view the remains. And it can be a painful process. It's kind of like going to the dentist. You can have an aching tooth, but you hate to go to the dentist.
Right.
But you have to go to the dentist to fix that aching tooth, and it's kind of like using a funeral professional, even though people don't like to go to funeral homes. But it's that's the first step of actually going to the funeral home to heal the fact, so that you can actually face the reality that your loved one has gone on. And the first time, and then what happens is by viewing the remains, it almost hits you. I've seen families just cry and break apart, and then they realize it, and then they're fine after that.
Right.
You know, they'll. I won't say they're fine after that, but I'm just saying it helps them heal.
Right.
Speeds up the healing process, and so there's benefit.
The numbness reduces, and the feelings kind of come back. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of families still have that same procedure, whether they're cremated or whether they're earth burial. It's just instead of going to the cemetery, you just take the loved one's remains to the crematory, and basically everything else is following.
And funeral planning is so important there, Jim. Folks really need to go ahead and take that time to get in, oftentimes to pick out their casket, or to pick out, you mentioned cremation, to pick out the urns, or to think through that process. What are some of the benefits of funeral planning?
Well, the biggest benefit that families tell us is they actually relieves the burden of them having to do it. Right. Because they're still, in a lot of times, they're still faced with accepting the fact that a loved one has died.
Right.
The first stage of when you go through the death process is shock, and so a lot of times those families are still in that shocking stage, so to speak.
Yeah.
Especially like children that maybe a mother or a father died just suddenly.
Right.
And they're still in shock, and then they have to face the also responsibility of caring for the loved one's remains and arranging funeral, process and so forth. And prearrangements can obviously relieve that burden.
Right.
So there's a huge advantage there. A lot of times, funeral homes have very easy methods of letting the family pay for the pre-need. You can even take an insurance, policy out. And then a lot of times, if the way the insurance policies work, it's just a burial policy, and if the person, let's say, is making like a payment, monthly payments, and they happen to live a year or 2 years, and it was set up like on a 3 or a 5 year contract, then and the person unfortunately dies, then the funeral is paid for, even though they may not have only paid half of what the funeral bill was.
Sure.
So there are a lot of funeral directors have made it real easy, in other words, for families to make prearrangements. And of course, all of them that I call on, do that, and they're all good at doing it.
Absolutely.
And the funds is another thing too. The funds are monitored by a state agency.
Right.
So
carefully monitored.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So everything's in our industry is very heavily regulated, from how you price things to what you tell your families to disclosures of concerning embalming or whatever, warranties on products that they sell or that funeral professionals sell. Everything is regulated to a T and itemized, and families pick and choose and what they want or don't want.
Sure.
So it's and you look at the average cost of funeral. When I first got out of college, I bought a brand new automobile. I paid $2,100 for it.
Right.
That was in 1969. Okay, when I was in college, still in college. $2,100 for a brand new Mustang. Anyway, that car today, and funerals back then were about $1,800 to $2,000.
Right.
Well, today that $2,100 automobile is like $23,000.
Oh yeah.
But that funeral, and that's like tenfold,
Right.
But well, not tenfold, but.
Yeah, it's about tenfold. That's right.
2,100,
22,000. Yeah.
So anyway, the funeral has not gone up anywhere near that. It's more like 4 or 5 times more than what it used to be.
Right. Right.
So the inflation has not hit our industry like it has others.
And some of those traditional costs that families need to be thinking about as they're planning that out, what are the biggest costs there for the family as they plan that out, Jim?
Well, this was compliments of the federal government, and that's called where they made funeral homes go in and itemize everything and quote a service charge based on what their actual costs are.
Sure.
And they take what their accountant tells them what it costs them to put on a funeral. Of course, one of the largest federated in Florida helps do that. We help do it as well. And then, what's the average cost per funeral today is about $4,700 for a funeral home to put that funeral on. Actually, put it on, and they're supposed to spell it out, to a family, which they do, and itemize everything out and let the families pick and choose what they want.
You shared with us in early February the importance of itemization. I'm sorry we've run out of time. There's so many more questions we're going to have to get into another time, Jim. But one key thing is, what's the future of the funeral business look like today?
You don't want to say rosy because most people don't like to think about death, but it looks it's going to be a very bright future and a strong future.
Right.
Simply because there's still a lot of dedicated. Most of the funeral directors are very dedicated to their profession. They do a great job of serving the families that they serve.
Sure.
The fact that even though we're in what they call a flat death rate now, and I could talk 30 minutes as to why that's what's going on there, the history behind that dating back to the Depression era, but anyway, the fact that baby boomers, and there are like 75 million of us, myself included, will be unfortunately affecting the death rate in the next 4, 5, 6 years. And so it'll be, unfortunately, there'll be about 700,000 to 800,000 more deaths occurring each year, they're saying, starting in about the next 5 or 6, 7 years.
Wow.
So there'll be an unfortunate need. I always tell people I'd love to go back to teaching school if I thought I could live forever,
Right.
I wouldn't even have to concern myself with the death care industry. But anyway, life goes on, and most of us live a good life, and fortunate to be here in the good old U.S. of A. So.
Absolutely, and that you are. Jim, sorry we've run out of time. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
You bet.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Jim Bowdre, the Territory Manager of Batesville Casket Company, coming up next. We had Jim in early last month. We ran out of time after almost 30 minutes. We had him back in again 7 weeks later, running out of time. There's still many more questions we wanted to get to. You can go online to learn more about Jim and his tremendous company, Batesville Casket Company, online at Batesville.com. Batesville.com. Aren't there more questions you want to know? Take the time to learn more. There's a lot more to the after-death industry than what we got into just today. Go online, Batesville.com. Thank you, Jim Bowdre, for being with us this morning. Absolutely.